Morning, everybody. We're Team Honu. I'm Shane. We have Alex, Marcus, Maggie, Peter, and Cheryl, and we're going to be presenting on Benchmark Senior Living. So to start off, we want to give you a brief overview of the project, a recap of what we told you last time, as well as a summary of our interview with Timothy Riley, who is the VP of Associate Experience at Benchmark Senior Living. So a couple questions that we want to answer from last time. Benchmark is a for-profit, privately held company, and they are working to rebrand away from the image of a senior living or senior care company towards a more human connection-based company. So throughout the presentation, we hope to give you an overview of the roles of employees, the company itself, and the senior living industry as a whole. One of the main talking points will be the structure and the culture, and how that differs between the home office and the many communities within Benchmark. And lastly, we'll talk about our perceived strengths and weaknesses of the company, and with that, sort of suggest some areas of improvement to address those concerns. So a brief structural overview at Benchmark. There's a few positives and a few negatives. Some of the positives include the division of labor, which we'll expand upon later, and the strong support for Benchmark's residents and their extended families. Some negatives include, like I said, the disconnect between the home office and the communities, and the conflicting goals and responsibilities that result from that. Lastly, we have the formal hierarchy and standardization. So the new hires at Benchmark go through a 3-day orientation program. The community or regional leaders work closely with the home office, and then the employees at the communities will do their training at those specified communities that they'll be working at. Day 1 consists of a lot of history and culture, learning about Benchmark, as well as their philosophy, their mission, and so on. All employees go through an in-depth training program specific to their job title, as well as having the option to participate in Benchmark University, which is basically online classes that Timothy Riley, who we interviewed, made a point of saying they're very flexible in terms of what you can learn about, the classes you can take, the timing, and so on. Through these educational and training programs, Benchmark employees have the ability to continuously upgrade their skills and to best serve the residents. Lastly, there's monthly employee town hall meetings, and this is a great way for them to work as a team and to sort of have everyone's voice be heard and recognized. Doing so sort of lets Benchmark analyze what are they already good at, what are they excelling at, and then what can be improved upon at the communities as well as at the home office.
For the structural positives for Benchmark, we will focus primarily on the division of labor. And the division of labor is defined as the separation of work into more specific jobs. This breakdown ensures that each person knows what is expected of them and what is expected of those working around them. This is important for a business because when labor is divided properly and explained properly, it allows employees to communicate effectively through all levels of business. We learned during our interview that the corporate office, most of their employees are part of a functional team that help the senior communities and this community's employees. The employees at the corporate office have specific and important jobs that they must complete in order for Benchmark to continue to succeed. These corporate offices, the corporate office also include regional teams. These regional teams are groups of employees who visit and report information for about 12 different Benchmark senior living communities. This is a vital job for a company such as Benchmark because it keeps the communication open between the senior communities and the corporate office, which keeps the company running effectively. The community structure, all the structures for the community are pretty similar. They all have an executive director that is in charge of the community, and each executive director has about 6 to 8 department heads working for them. And then, of course, at the senior communities, there are the staff employees who tend to the residents. At these communities, there are a wide range of services available for the residents. These services can range from simply feeding or bathing the residents, all the way to driving residents to doctor's appointments or even providing them necessary medication. Benchmark is set up for success. Their structure allows employees to work effectively with each other, and each action that an employee makes is necessary for the business to succeed.
So obviously we learned about a lot of different types of structures in class and in the textbook. However, two that are very applicable to Benchmark are formal hierarchy and standardization. So in formal hierarchy, there's a well-defined chain of command. The people at the top of the chain use their power to direct work processes and allocate resources to the rest of the chain. However, the structure is not agile in complex situations because individuals are still able to follow the chain of, or expected to follow the chain of command, even if that isn't quite possible due to holes in the chain. Standardization is a type of structure that focuses on routines in terms of behavior and processes. There are standardized processes, standardized outputs, as well as standardized skills. Based on the different company structures that we learned about, it's clear that the home office at Benchmark definitely follows a formal hierarchy structure. There's a well-defined chain of command starting with Tom Grape, the CEO, at the top, all the way down to the associates and the interns. Because of this chain of command, an employee can only report to one person. So when there's gaps in the chain due to someone leaving the company or maternity leave, it's really hard because more people have to take on additional roles. Currently at the company, there are goals in this structure, and it really is confusing some employees. The communities are more so a standardization structure because they're standardized processes. For example, checking the rooms in AL and Harbor every night, as well as how to deal with falls or wandering. There's also standardized outputs when it comes to care, as well as standardized responsibilities, such as how to deal with the elderly. So next, conflict is definitely a big thing at companies. At Benchmark, there are two types of conflict that are very relevant, incompatible goals and task interdependence. So incompatible goals occur when one department's goals conflict with those of another. Negotiations or fights often are a result, while task interdependence often occurs when the completion of your goal is dependent on other people. So there's definitely a lot of this type of conflict at Benchmark. One big thing that Mr. Riley mentioned is that there's often a disconnect in the goals between the home office and those of the community. While there are regional employees, such as the regional directors of operation or the regional directors of sales, these people aren't enough to make the whole process flow smoothly. The home office often sets goals based on analytics and initiatives that the company wants to improve upon. However, the community's goals are more focused on the day-to-day care of the residents, so the communities aren't able to complete the goals that the home office wants, which affects the overarching goals of the company. Lastly, there are communication issues at the company, especially with email, because the home office employees aren't at the communities that often. Most of the communication is through email, and obviously with email there can be misunderstandings, thus requiring follow-up with phone calls, which just takes a lot of time out of everyone's day. Lastly, there are a lot of responsibilities that the EDs and DBAs aren't aware of. They often reach out to the home office expecting those people to do their jobs, and when the home office people respond that it's up to the EDs or DBAs to do said task, they're often met with a lot of resistance because they don't want to fulfill that role.
Okay. So there are a couple positives and negatives that I'd like to run through before we get into the culture at Benchmark. And a couple of the positives are known as the culture ambassador, which is a position, so it's someone who's in charge of establishing and maintaining positive culture within the communities. So also Benchmark separates itself from the field due to its knack for innovation. They really stress creative thinking, solving new problems. Tim Riley stressed the importance of being adaptable in order to satisfy Benchmark's customers. One of the main concerns or negatives moving forward with Benchmark is its ability to sustain this level of positive culture as the company grows and acquires new facilities. So to talk a little bit about the culture ambassador, this is just a regular employee, anyone from a janitor to a cook to an associate who is identified by the leadership team for exemplifying energy, enthusiasm, commitment to the cultural values at Benchmark. This person is in charge of coordinating fun activities such as pizza parties, ice cream parties, as well as fundraisers and other events and activities. This person meets twice a year with an executive in order to provide feedback and share information. So innovation is another huge positive of the culture at Benchmark. They pride themselves on their innovative thinking. So they tailor resident surveys towards being able to identify changes in tastes. New residents are asked to take surveys 1 week into their residency, and then 1 month, a half a year in, and then finally after a year as well. So Tim Riley identified something interesting, that there will be changes in tastes in the coming decades. So the people that are currently enjoy listening to, say, Frank Sinatra, in 20 years they'll want to listen to Elvis or the Beatles. So it is important to collect this feedback in order to keep up with the change. Additionally, employees are asked to take yearly surveys in order to provide feedback and help management gauge job satisfaction. This feedback has resulted in extremely high employee satisfaction, as Benchmark has consistently been ranked one of the top senior living communities to work for in the Northeast as well as the entire United States. They were recently ranked number 3 by Forbes, Fortune magazine. Another innovation is the not-for-profit One Fund that they have, which was talked about a little bit by Tim Riley. It's dedicated to helping associates who are struggling financially. Say they come down sick with an illness, cancer. It provides additional funding to be able to help those people out. And lastly, CEO Tom Grape identifies Benchmark as a human connection company. So stressing this connection and close relationships with residents and their families is their top priority. This is important because committing a family member to assisted living is such a difficult situation for many of these residents and families. There's usually a lot of emotional baggage and maybe even some guilt associated with this transition. So the close connections really help this transition be a little bit more smooth.
So overall, Benchmark currently doesn't have a lot of cultural weaknesses, but I need to talk about 2 points. From the interview with the VP of HR, we know that as all the other companies, Benchmark also has a lot of internal conflicts. Besides what Maggie has mentioned about the structural ones, there are also some workplace conflicts between employees, like salespeople against nurses and new people against old people. There are a lot of dynamics. Especially before 3 or 4 years ago, Benchmark lost its own way with experiencing poor business performance, which was something they were not accustomed to. At that time, Benchmark was facing a situation that a lot of new competitors coming into the senior living market. According to Tom Grape, who is the CEO of Benchmark, has mentioned at the 17th Annual Awards Gala on March the 29th this year, instead of acting as a team, we began looking for people to blame within the company. So he said that the culture was deteriorating and people were leaving. So actually at that time, Benchmark was lacking of team cohesion, which refers to the attraction people feel toward the team and the motivation remained the members. So in that case, when they faced the external challenges and competitions, the employees were more likely to be stressed by the threats and make less effective decisions. Another thing is related to the cognitive dissonance. Benchmark's mission statement is connecting to what matters, and their goal is to deeply understand people, meet them where they are, and connect them to what matters, and possibly at every stage of life. Benchmark needs to make a profit, but their actions aren't aligning with the belief of helping senior citizens. According to the interview report from Senior Housing News, Tom Grape said, if we take a look at the economics of assisted living, 70 cents of every dollar covers the operating expenses, mainly labor, and the 20 cents covers the debt services in the building, and 10 cents is the cash flow. So actually it's very hard to reduce the staffing, utility, and food costs without cutting into the bone of what service offering is.
So now I'm going to get into some of the recommendations we have for Benchmark. The elderly care industry is growing due to the baby boomer generation kind of reaching that age. So Benchmark needs to meet the needs of that growing generation and also continue to expand with the client base that's expanding. So what this means is they need to include new food and new music to meet the sort of changing client demands, and then they also need to increase staffing and funding for the growing customer base and for the changing industry. Another recommendation is to strengthen the HR department. So this includes improving vetting processes to hire more capable employees to provide effective elderly care. In addition, Benchmark should increase training for its growing and changing customers, and also for the changing corporate initiative, which is to be a human connection company. In addition, as Maggie mentioned, there's a lot of conflict between the corporate and community offices, and so creating a communication infrastructure will help kind of reduce that conflict by ensuring that the corporate and community offices are in touch with each other and know what they need. The corporate offices often want to hold events or initiatives that kind of conflict with the resources that the community offices are able to provide, and so by creating this chain of communication, they are able to plan events and devote time and resources necessary for these events and initiatives. Another suggestion we have is implementing quality control systems. So this includes providing feedback after events, and for the kind of transition of Benchmark to a human connection company to ensure the corporation is meeting the goals with this change. This includes also making sure that the quality of service provided is the same across the whole community, because oftentimes there's a ton of communities and the care that they're providing is not the same. And so to do that, we suggest reducing the number of offices that the regional directors are overseeing. So this is 12 offices, so reducing that down. This will help you focus on a smaller number of communities, and thus allows them to be more in touch with the needs of those communities. Ultimately, this will help reduce conflict between the corporate and community offices, because the regional directors act as a middleman between the corporate and community offices, and so having the regional people be more in touch with the community needs will help allow corporate offices to be able to understand and communicate to meet those needs. Lastly is resource management support. So the culture ambassadors already have a full-time job, and they're responsible for planning events and activities, meeting company goals, and for funding. And so the added responsibility of their first job on top of being a culture ambassador kind of puts a lot of stress on them, and so they have a lot to meet. So to kind of help support these culture ambassadors, we suggested increasing the funding and also the support for sort of the staffing activities that are needed for that position.
Thank you for your time, and we look forward to answering your questions.